How are we all? Well, I thought we'd start today by doing a bit of anxiety work. I've had loads and loads of emails and messages because, of course, we've had 2 years of complete trauma and terrible news. And just as we thought that the end was in sight, Putin decides to go and invade the Ukraine, which is horrible because of obviously the civilians that are being affected by it. But also is going to just add to a lot of people's pressure. So I'm wondering how everyone is feeling about it. And I said I would cover it at the very beginning of this because a lot of people have asked about their children who are feeling afraid. It's a strange thing, really, technology, because for a lot of you listening, obviously with me only being 26, this is just something I've heard. But, you know, back in 2003, when there were invasions into places like Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. With regards to that, there wasn't a great deal of information online. So if you were somebody like me as a young person who didn't really care about the news, well, I've never really cared about the news because I've always felt it was quite bad. You know, quite bad, the news a lot, isn't it? They don't report on kittens being saved from loft and child helps old lady cross road with shopping. They're the kind of news things that I would feel happy to watch. But back in the day, if you didn't watch the news or read the newspapers, which you had to buy, then essentially you didn't really hear about stuff. So even though when I was a young person, there was information around that was kind of suggesting that there was a war going on, and certainly when the Twin Towers happened, that was something that kind of was very present. Most of the stuff just went over a lot of us civilians' heads. Didn't directly affect us that much. If you didn't have somebody in service in your family, you weren't that worried about it in an overt way because you didn't have to be, because you didn't hear about it. Nowadays, kids don't have that. They have instantaneous information online, most of which is not even true. For example, my sister just texted me and said, "Is Harry Styles dead?" Because apparently there was a rumour that Harry Styles was dead 4 days ago and people were like, "My God, Harry Styles is dead." Because that's what happens on the internet. And even though I'm poking fun at the fact that that is true, and she really did just text at me, and my response is, "Did you kill him?" Because nobody else seems to know about it. But for our kids, that's something that they're submerged in. And when you think about, a lot of kids have smart technology from 7 years of age now, guys. That's a lot of opportunity to find out things that us adults wouldn't necessarily want them to find out, and also a lot of things that we don't want to find out. But the problem with our brains is that we're hardwired to look for things that are more negative. It's a survival mechanism. So for those of you who find yourself doom scrolling and think there's something wrong with you, it's not. It's just that you're a hypervigilant human who wants to live a long life, and so your brain looks for opportunities to protect you. And one of the ways to do that is to seek out negative things so that you can plan to protect yourself against it. Unfortunately, that lovely evolutionary tract that we've gone down isn't very useful to us anymore, because back in the days when there was a saber-toothed tiger rampaging after you down the road, it was really helpful to pay attention to negative stuff because it would help you run fast and get away. Nowadays, when it's things that you can't control that you're seeing, but you're still seeking it out, it leads to feelings of helplessness, anxiety, obvious stress that then exacerbates that, and a general feeling that you have very little power. And that's not a good state for humans to be in. And if you additionalize that to the state of being a child, well, children have even less power than adults. So think back to when you were a young person or a teenager. It didn't really matter what you wanted. If your parents didn't want it, it wasn't going to happen. Or if you did do something that you wanted and then people didn't agree with you, there were repercussions and consequences that weren't very nice. So the control that you had temporarily in that circumstance was then revoked because you'd done something that people didn't like. So you've essentially got all the things that I've just said going on in the adult brain, but it's impacting on children similarly, and they don't have the control that even you have, which is minimal when you think about that bigger picture I've just talked about. So that's why right now there are a few things that I'm doing with my kids. So I've got teenagers. There's no point hiding from the reality of what they're seeing because they're seeing it. And also, they've just spent 2 years not trusting the press. So that means that they are keyed into this idea that they can't just look in one place to find out their information because they don't trust the information like a lot of us feel. So that means then not just going on one site, but maybe going on 10 different sites from different areas funded by different people to make sure that the information is neutralised to some degree. But then that throws up lots of questions. And there's a few things that parents need to think about. And it's also for people who are suffering with anxiety around this. So first of all, do not seek to control that which you cannot control. Rule 1 in the anxiety checklist. You cannot change any of what's happening over in the Ukraine. You can't do that. Not as far as the invasion. It's not nice that we can't do it. It's just that you aren't in control. So if you're going to put your energies into worrying about that specific element, well, you're going to feel awful, and so are your children if they are feeling that similarly. That isn't to say we don't care and have compassion towards those situations. It's that we don't invest our energy depleting it by concentrating focus on something that we have literally no power over. And that's something that will add to your anxiety. It's far better, for example, to say, okay, I can't control that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my emphasis into fundraising, because they'll need medical kits and they'll need money, and refugees are going to need support. And there are ways of then placing energy and focus into something that firstly you do have control over. Secondly, there is a result that's positive. And most importantly, it distracts you from that ultimate thing I was talking about a moment ago, which is just concentrate and focus on that real negativity. Secondly, when it comes down to children, there is one rule as a parent, and that is to be a safe place and a safe space and to seem resilient and to seem secure even when you don't feel it. Because if you're not the safe space and safe place, then they're going to reflect the unsturdiness of the attitude that you play out when it comes down to what's happening right now. So, when my children ask me questions, first of all, I don't try to answer things that I don't understand or know. And secondly, I'm not going to spend weeks learning about intricacies that are actually not going to be that helpful because I can't control them. So instead, I let them ask the questions as opposed to just loading the information. And parents do that a lot. We think our kids will have a problem with something or they'll be struggling with something, so we overload them with information to be helpful, but we don't actually hear what it is they're concerned about. So ultimately, if you've got kids, just let them come to you. Like, ask them the question, have you got any concerns? And if they have, elicit that from them. Don't suggest what you think they need to know, because arguably it probably won't answer the questions, and worse than that, it can often burden them because they hadn't thought about some of the things that you thought about with your linear logical adult brain. When it comes down to answering those questions as well, you always have to think about the reframe perspective. So ultimately, it's really awful that terrible things are happening in the Ukraine, and to Russian soldiers too, because remember, nobody wins in war. Everybody's somebody's child. So there's no winners and losers in that respect. So compassion needs to go in all directions in that respect, because we wanted to teach our children about the sanctity of life, right? But arguably, again, if you focus on that, there's no winning and positivity because it's hard to find that in death. But it is possible to help them understand the gratitude that they feel for their own world and their own lives here, while still extending compassion. It's the same with helping them to understand how grateful they can be for the blessings of what we experience here. And then on top of that, we've got to think about the fact that they've spent 2 years having their lives put on hold, and then they've had this temptation of a beautiful suggestion and hopeful situation, and like playing out where they can get back to normal, and it's been taken away. So there's going to be fundamental elements of loss and just a sense of, I can't trust the world anymore. And I think for us as adults, and even young adults who are listening to this now, it is different because we've had a percentage of our life stolen, but not the major part. Whereas some of these kids, they're coming into their 3rd year now. And if you're 12, that's a huge amount of your life. If you're 6, it's even more challenging, and so on and so forth. But they've had elements of their world completely disrupted, and they've been feeling for a long time like the world and security has shifted and changed, and finally they were getting to a point where that was hopefully going to return, and then boom, we're back where we were, but now people are talking about war. Like I said, I think when it comes down to what we need to get across to our children is, it's our job to take the strain, it's our job to carry the burden, it's our job to make them feel reassured, because if we are reassuring them, they will trust us, because we are the people that they model on and believe. And that's a powerful place to be. And I know that some parents will say, well, how can we say to our children that they're safe when we don't feel safe? And it's like, well, you know what? You're just going to have to do it, because that's what kids need to hear. And we'll work on how we figure that strategy out, right? But now is not the time for parents to think it's a good idea to go out and say to kids, yeah, it might be terrible. It's not. This is a time where we buckle up and we sit in the driving seat and we remember our mama and papa bear and we go, it's going to be okay, because we're going to figure out how it's going to be okay, but you just need to trust me that it's going to be okay. And that's a powerful reassurance. It'll be more powerful than any other reassurance that exists out there. And arguably the idea that you then have to explain and explore why it's going to be absolutely okay. Now, that doesn't have to play out. Again, that's an adult paradigm where people say, well, explore the strategies and give me the ABC points and let's do the Venn diagram and the whiteboard about how it's going to play out in that context. Young people don't need that. They just need a very sure, very reassuring explanation as far as you being firm in your belief that it will be all right, and it will be all right. Because this time too shall pass, as the saying goes, and every time does. For those of you who are feeling super anxious right now, you have to just say to yourself, how much is that going to empower me? Like, how much is giving away your sense of security and your sense of peace and calm in the world around you? How is that going to play out? And it's a bit like the pandemic. If you were to ask somebody now who had had an attitude back at the beginning of the pandemic of, hey, this is life. Shit happens. You know what? Life's a journey of loss. We undertake to do it joyfully. Life is suffering at times, but you know what? Some of us suffer less because we accept that it's part of the process. You ask them how they fared versus somebody who just became terrified and spent the last 2 years living in terror. Who did better? Both faced the same circumstance. And that's not a judgment on the person who was terrified, nor on the person who decided not to be. I'm saying, when you think about that context, there's been 2 years, and one of those parties I have just described who decided not to give the power away, but instead to believe that we have to accept that life is full of ups and downs, slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, the reality that we cannot control the uncontrollable, and that life is finite. One of those did far better psychologically because of that. And it's not about me judging or saying one was better. I'm saying for coping strategy-wise and psyche-wise, one fared more positively. And if we're about to go into another scenario where there could be a played out long period of time where we have to hear about these things, maybe it's time that we start to live a bit more in the present and acknowledge the things that we have power over. And if we want to get involved in things that are involving the war, we do it in a proactive, productive way that actually gives us some consequences, such as raising money, getting our kids to do cake sales and thrift sales in our house, and anything that kind of gets them to feel motivated and empowered, than sitting and being afraid. Fear gets you literally nowhere, ever. It doesn't. Because even in horrible situations when you're afraid, the ones who fare best are the ones who develop the courage to confront it. So the only usefulness fear has is to motivate you to gain courage and change. That's it. If it does anything else, it's being useless to you. So I will answer some questions now, and I hope you're all okay, by the way. But I know it's kind of quite a solemn time in that respect. I know a lot of people are really worried. And it's not like I'm saying don't worry about anything. I'm saying worry about that which you can control and change. And spend your time embracing and appreciating what we have, not because we're saying, oh, how lucky are we and how unlucky are you, but not that kind of frivolous, glib way of approaching it. Much more of a, wow, isn't it incredible that sometimes we fail to even see around us something that is so clearly different to how other people live. And even for myself, like I've spent 2 years fighting for democracy to play out, for tyranny not to rise, for people to have autonomy over their own bodies, for people to have rights to express their thoughts and feelings. And when you find moments like this and you see that in a country like ours, we have still been able to do that, albeit we've been attacked and berated and abused and had our names put in the press and called horrible names, at least we were still able to do it. And that's something that we should cherish, no matter where we are on the spectrum of our feelings. Psychologically, that's a real positive about the UK. Ooh, got a question there that you're going to be having a lot of anxiety. I was burgled in February whilst I was in bed. I couldn't check as I have cerebral palsy and it's hard to get up quick. Any advice on how to feel safe again? So I did some research on home invasions. It's going back probably about 7 years now. And one of the things that was really common, happened in about 52% of cases, is people who were burgled actually moved home within the first 12 months after they experienced that burgle experience, because of the fact that they felt violated. And on one level, it makes sense because people think, well, it's going to create some distance. Maybe the feelings that I have about this place that I live will change and shift because I'm in a new place. But I always think that when you've been through a really traumatic experience, you need to wait at least 12 months to 18 months before you make a major life change decision, because trauma is normal. If you're in bed with cerebral palsy, you've already got some issues that additionalize the complications in your life, and also in that kind of circumstance makes you feel more vulnerable because it wasn't as easy for you to get out of bed, it wasn't as easy for you to call for help. All those things that are very, very real, and you'll never get used to that no matter whether you have a disability or otherwise, because the chances are that you're not confronted by situations of such violation more than once or twice, potentially, hopefully, in a lifetime, where we really have our safety challenged. So you're going to have an adaptation phase now. First of all, there's a grief process. Your safe place got completely violated. Now, another thing that I'd say is the majority of people who are home invaders are burglars and they will not harm you. That doesn't make people feel better about the fact that somebody's been in their home, but it should help to reduce the psychological threat that people feel when they consider the what ifs. The what if I'd got up? The chances are, if you'd got up and had been able to confront them, they'd have ran off. This idea that people stay and fight and harm people in those circumstances just isn't true. It doesn't stand up to statistics. It's very unusual for people to do that. And that means that even in the worst case scenario, if you confronted somebody in your own house and you found them doing it, you would literally have them run away, just escape. They just want to get out. They might try to grab some stuff, but they're not coming for you. So reduce it down to that position of, this was an opportunist person who decided that they could get in, probably because there was a vulnerability about the property. They always go for opportunism. That's what thieves do. If your house is the one with the open window, if your house is the one with the poor lock, if your house, it's not your fault, we never think about that until it's happened. If your house is the one that doesn't have a gravelly drive so that when somebody walks up to the window, the person can hear it crunching. These are all things. If your house is the one without a dog, that's going to make it more inviting. These are all things that evidence very clearly states. So what you have to do now is firstly say to yourself, right, okay, this has been horrible, but most importantly, I've survived it. Hey, the worst case scenario happened. Somebody came in my house and they didn't hurt me, because you were never the victim. You were never their intention. They were opportunists. They probably had dependency issues. They were in and out. Their life is terrible. Doesn't excuse it. Doesn't make it okay. It's just putting in a context. These are not big, scary people. These are people with horrible lives, dependency issues, who just see an easy way of making a bit of cash and don't think about the psychological ramifications on the victim. So bring it back down to that person of pity. You don't want to be anything like them, of course you don't, but you also don't need to fear them. Add to that this really important fact. Your brain has to get used to what it feels like to be fully vulnerable for a short moment in time. And it's horrible. So now your brain's like, okay, think about it like this. If you are somebody who has gone through a trauma, your brain is going to be on overdrive, and it kind of splits itself in different personalities. It gets strategic. It starts saying to itself, right, we have to survive better, guys. Something has broken down here. Something went wrong in the plan of safety. Right, let's get a whiteboard out and start scribbling on it and decide how we're going to stop this happening again. That's what the brain does. And it comes up with a list of possibilities, such as buy a gun, baseball bat, knife. And I'm not even joking. That's the kind of thing the brain does. These are all things that we could do to stop anybody harming us again, right? Move, get a safe room. All of those are natural. The brain is on a clear path to make sure you're safe in the future. But it gets caught up in that catastrophizing and planning for the worst case scenario to a point where often you feel like you can't sleep, you might get sweaty when you're in bed, you're constantly overthinking, you're absolutely convinced that if it's happened before, it could happen again. That is the same system. Your brain is working in the same way. It's as simple as that. So you have an adaptation period now where over time, that moment that occurred will become more blurry, more out of focus, because all those other days that you were perfectly safe and all the days that you will be safe from that day onwards will start to amalgamate and make it more difficult to focus and fixate on that moment. Now, for some people, you might need to think about in the future, if it's still concerning you 18 months down the line, some kind of therapeutic intervention. But you've had cerebral palsy, you live with cerebral palsy. I'll be honest with you, you've probably got more resilience in your little finger than people like me have in our entire bodies, because you've had your issues from early on. You've coped with more problems than many people will ever understand in their lives. And that means your mindset is probably more steely than you give yourself credit for. But give yourself time. Also, when I did the research, there were some things that came out that are a bit practical. Sorry to bore you. Such as having a dog really is effective in stopping burglaries. So if you want to do something to change your opportunity when it comes down to somebody being an opportunist, then that's actually helpful. Making sure that you have a really effective lock. Making sure that your windows have locks. Making sure that you have prickly plants, would you believe, on your windowsill. Very effective. As I said, noisy, crunchy stones walking up to your front door and to your windows. All of those, aside from the obvious, which are like alarms and things like that, make a difference to burglars. So just think about what you can do strategically, because your home should be your haven. Even when some bastard has tried to infect that and violate it, you can take the power back. You can make that your haven again. And like I said, just to acknowledge that you have more issues because you've already got a concern with your body and the way that that responds and reacts in those situations when there feels like there's a vulnerability anyway, it can exacerbate that feeling. So I hope I've answered that in detail enough. Just giving you the update. 7 months ago, I had the closest suicide attempt I've ever had. And I spent the last 7 months in facilities with mental health experts. And for the first time in 19 years, I'm able to control my PTSD and OCD. I honestly feel like I'm cured. I'm a different person now. I know it took the worst case scenario for me to get help, but I want you to thank you for all the advice over the years, because I'm honestly in the best place mentally. That's amazing. Thanks, Adam. I really appreciate that. And first of all, it's really nice that you say thanks, but honestly, that's all down to you, and all down to you taking the opportunities that you've obviously decided to create and carve out for yourself. And I think the message that it is here to everybody else is that absolutely people can get over critically, powerfully disabling mental health issues. And I think that we don't talk about that a lot. We often talk about mental health issues or mental illness as being some perpetual experience for the rest of our lives. And that would be like when I was anorexic and bulimic and very unwell, saying to me that I would never be able to live a day without wanting to starve myself or run like 15 miles, because at that point, that seemed like a terminal prognosis, because that's what happens. You're given a classification and it's like, okay, well, I am anorexic. That's my title. And now I don't even know how I ever had the acumen and dedication to live that life. It's just bizarre to me how I managed to maintain that for a very, very long time, over a decade. And the idea that people will sometimes say to me, you always live with an eating disorder. And I'm like, yeah, I don't. And I don't like the fact that we sometimes put out these mass stereotypes, because if you don't fit that, or if you're somebody who doesn't want to feel that way, then it can actually, prescribing that kind of language to it means that you ultimately don't feel that you even fit in the paradigm that you've been classified within. So when people like you come on and say, look, I feel completely cured, it's like, yeah. And that's such an important and powerful experience to share. So I'm really, really glad. I'd love to hear more about it. So if you could maybe email me and let me know the ins and outs, just tell me a story, you know what I'm like for that. I would love to hear it. And most of all, thank you so much for sharing that and being so gracious to, but it's not required. It's a joy to hear things like that. That's why I do it. You're absolutely amazing. And I'm just going to send you so much love and blessings for the rest of your life, because living the rest of your life free of something that you never caused is just something you powerfully deserve. I'm really struggling with daily life. I've been out of work for a few years now, and I'm ashamed as I can't function normally and don't want to go anywhere most days. My mental health has been bad for at least 4 years, although I don't think it was ever good. I've struggled most of my life, and I'm waiting and waiting to be seen by a psychiatrist, but I'm now 51. What if it's too late and I'm just left? I don't think I want to live like this anymore. I'm not too bad today, but I can't even function well with friends. Please, can you advise? I've applied for PIT, but got nowhere. I want to start my own design and art business, but as I'm struggling, that has been put on the back burner. I did struggle through uni, but I somehow got through. I don't want universal credit to push me into something I can't do or I can't handle. I'm no good with people. I'm sorry this is long, but there's so much more to add, and I don't think you'll have the time. Okay, so you're 51. That means you've got pretty much your whole life to live again. So let's pedal back from it's too late, genuinely. Let's just pedal back. You're not here tonight saying I'm 93, and even if you were, I would still be saying, well, there's a few years there that we can hopefully engage in to ensure that you get to live the life that you desperately and fully wish to live. 51 is young. I know that in our society, particularly if you're female, by the time you're 30, they all convince you that you're going to be dead at 33. It's a myth. Women are vital, men are vital, human beings are incredible, and we get older and wiser, and we get more and more aware of what it is that we want and the purpose that maybe we've been put on this planet for, and it takes a long time to cultivate. In your paragraphs, there is two distinct areas. One is I'm helpless and I'm giving my power away. The other is I know exactly what I want to do. And they're juxtapositions. So there's a cognitive dissonance going on within you. One is I have this belief system that I've cultivated, which is that I'm creative and I'm artistic, and I have hopes and dreams and aspirations of doing something with that. And that makes sense, because when you have creativity and when you have a natural inclination for that creativity, it's something you can't control. It's been innately created and provided for you within you so that you can do something and offer it to the world. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, anybody who is excellent at art or photography or writing, it's really mind-blowing to me when people just don't spend their entire life just dedicating themselves to that, because that's your innate skill. Like, that's why you're here, as far as I'm concerned, to cultivate that and then share that with people like me, who when they paint like a 5-year-old with webbed hands, that's literally not my skill base. Therefore, I need other people to introduce me to their creative artistic talent so that I can just sit in awe and enjoy that gift that they have clearly been given. So it sounds like you're very aware of what you want. I don't think your self-esteem and confidence is at a level where you've kind of walked that path and realised that that's your purpose. I think you need to do some reframing and referencing of that. And then the other side is where you're being helpless and giving your power away, which is, I don't know what's wrong with me. my mental health has been bad. I think it's always been bad. And I'm waiting for a psychiatrist to confirm that it's bad, to tell me what's wrong. And this is the bit that maybe is a bit of a mismatch. So like, a psychiatrist can help. They can classify you, of course they can. So you could decide that you want to go and see a private psychiatrist, an NHS one who works private. That means that whatever they say, your assessment could be taken on by your GP and by your primary care trust. That is something that you can do. It will cost you 400 quid. It's not cheap. You might be able to get one cheaper online these days. I don't know. But certainly because they are astute professionals who know their worth, so to speak, psychiatrists charge a premium. But you could skip the queue and you could do that. And that could be something that's worth investing in. Even though finances aren't great, it could still be something that's worth investing in because it fast tracks you. You get to sit with somebody, it will feel nicer, it won't be rushed. You'll kind of know that you're their customer and they have to do a really good job because, hey, there's a transaction going on. And you will, at the end of that, get told, well, you're bipolar or BPD or the schizoaffective disorder. It could be all different kinds of things. And I'm obviously not classifying you, I'm just throwing out words that you could get classified with. And from there, it might be that there are medications that you can take. Or it might be that they say, well, this is why you feel the way you feel. And this has provoked those issues. And these are some things that may help transition you to a better place. Or this is some therapy that might be effective. But it'll give you arguably something that you can work with. But it's not going to change you. The only thing that's going to change you is you making some choices about what you deserve. So you haven't got PIP. Well, okay, is that because you've applied for it and they've rejected you? Or you've just been ignored? Because believe me, right now, the benefits, a lot of people just seem to be falling through the nets. So if that's the case, you need to start hassling them. People who are struggling with their mental health and mental illness often don't because they feel like the world is already overwhelming, that they don't deserve things. The self-esteem is so low that they think, well, I'm just not going to ask for what I need. We have to start being more vocal about those needs. You're entitled to them. So pick yourself up in that respect, acknowledge what you need and fight for it. Even though you might need some help, even though you might want to enlist a friend, it doesn't really matter. Just make that happen. But the big thing for me is, okay, you don't want to go on benefits and be forced into a job that you hate. I get that as well, I really do. And arguably, ironically, now is quite a good time to still be getting what you're entitled to because they're so behind with the backlog of COVID that arguably it's not going to be easy for people to just get you a job in anything that you want, as in throw you into something you're not completely satisfied with. So you could arguably start concentrating on your art. And when people say about getting jobs and the concerns that they have about it, I remember doing work with somebody years and years ago, and they were really kind of in a bad place. They'd lost their job, they were redundant, they felt like the world was ending, they really did. And they couldn't imagine that they were ever going to get another job. And because it's hilarious, I will often get asked to do speeches at places, not so much in the last few years. A lot of people haven't wanted me to go and give speeches in the last few years, guys, not with this big job and the way that I felt. But before that, when I was still a media sweetheart, basically I would go and I'd get asked to talk about entrepreneurship. And I always used to get on stage and be like, well, I think I'm a good person to talk about entrepreneurship because I'm relatively unsuccessful and I've failed a lot of times, because that's the journey of the entrepreneur. Like Bill Gates, megalomaniac, but Bill Gates, etc., they aren't your classic entrepreneurs. Your classic entrepreneurs just fall flat on their faces like 100 times and then 1 out of 1,000 succeed, right? But the rest of us learn a lot and tend to find the place and a space that we fit, even though we're not going to be billionaires. It makes us feel glad for our experience and journey. You wouldn't trade it for the world. You've got talents. You can be a company director tomorrow. And I remember working with this guy, and that's what I said to him, and that's what he did. He just bought an off-the-shelf company name, and he started doing what he wanted to do. And okay, it was small and it was part-time, but he did it. And he went from being that perception, self-wise, as being somebody who hadn't achieved and hadn't attained what he wanted to attain, to suddenly being a company director, and he could give himself a CEO title or a managing director or whatever he wanted to call himself, and he could do that, he could nail that. And that shifted his confidence. So this idea that your life is over is false. It may be a new beginning. So maybe it's time to say goodbye to the old life. Maybe it's not been working for you for a long time, and you know that, and you're not shedding that skin right now, and you're being told let go, and you're afraid to let go. And so you imagine that maybe I just need to fully let go and end it all, because at the end of the day, there's no point in trying A, B, and C. But actually, it was never A, B, and C. It was D, E, and F that you were meant to be going for. And that happens when you're just willing to just say, okay, maybe it's time to take some risks. Maybe it's time to call myself some important name with my artistic projects and just start doing it. Maybe it's time to get an Etsy shop and sell my products there. Because all of those are possibilities and potentials. So many people think that they are stuck, and it just turns out that they're pointing the wrong way in the house that they're stood in, looking at a brick wall, and if they just turn around, there's 2 windows and a door, and they can just walk straight out. But because they're so convinced that ultimately they're locked in, they don't realize they're just looking in the wrong direction. Right now, you're 51. By 55, you could have a life that you only dreamed of, but you only get that when you start dreaming. And every single person who has a dream, it's not there to punish you or make you feel that you haven't achieved. It's there to drive you. It's a vision of possibility. It's literally guidance. It's saying, this is the ultimate goal. And if you break that down into milestones, then in the end, you'll achieve that ultimate goal. It's what I do constantly in my life. If I think about a big picture, well, I'm exhausted. I mean, I'm middle-aged. You know, getting out of bed's hard work for the first 20 minutes these days. If I think about big pictures of what I want to achieve, then you immediately create this idea of impossibility, because you're not a child anymore. When you're a kid, you can think, gonna marry a prince or a princess, and I'm gonna live in a massive castle, and somebody's gonna do my makeup every day, and I'm gonna get served melon just whenever I want. I don't know why I went for melon there, guys. Must just be something I'm hankering after. But as you get older, you start becoming more realistic. But unfortunately, that gets tethered with the way that the world tells you it's meant to work. So then you get told that your dreams and your aspirations are unrealistic. What's your A plan? Okay, that's maybe not realistic. So what's your B plan? And it's just bullshit. The truth is, yes, as we get older, we become more realistic and we need more strategy, but the dream is still the same. The goal is still the same. You refine it. You break it down into achievable milestones, but it's completely achievable when you start doing that. I remember when I did my master's, and you get told you've got to write 25,000 words, and kind of just having that moment before I started it of like, oh, I really just don't want to have to write 25,000 words, and kind of speaking to my tutor, and he just said, I just don't know why you're stressed. It's like 5,000 word essays, just do each bit independently. And it was suddenly like, oh God, I've done loads of 5,000 word essays. It's not even like a day's work. So suddenly it changed this overwhelming idea into something that could be done essentially in 5 days, right? The art, the creativity, all of that is within you for a reason. And I always say, it's not our right to not do it, because some of us aren't blessed with such talents. Use yours. And as I said with the psychiatrist, if you can look at having a parent lend you the money, or a friend lend you the money at worst, or doing something where you can achieve that fee, then it may well be worth you trying to do that, so that you skip the queue and feel that you're achieving what you want now, so that it can fast track you. But drop the idea that 51 is anything but young. It's the new 30, kid. It's the new 30. Hi, Emma. Any advice on how to deal with bad social anxiety after being followed an attack, please? It's not really social anxiety, okay? Again, hands up, guys, because, you know, you'll always have a critic. It's not my job to diagnose. Clearly, I don't know the ins and outs of what's going on. You said social anxiety. I don't hear that. When you're followed and attacked, that's trauma. So it may present itself as being socially anxious, but it's a traumatic reaction to an occurrence, to a violation. And if you're feeling suddenly hyper anxious in certain circumstances, well, it's because your environment didn't feel safe anymore, because you were just going about your business and somebody had followed you and then attacked you. So therefore you're on high alert, you're looking around the room, you're talking to people, and you're constantly worried about what that person over there is doing, what that person over there is thinking, what that person who might be walking behind you is doing, so on and so forth, right? Totally rational, because you've been hurt. So a little bit like I was saying about the person who was burgled not so long ago, although it's a different circumstance in the context that you were violated, what you're recognizing now is your brain trying to figure out how to never let this happen again. And there are a few things you can do. So what we know about people who attack people is they look for vulnerability, availability, and desirability. You are desirable to that person, you can do nothing about it. At the end of the day, you can't help being attractive to somebody. But we can do things about availability and vulnerability. Always make it clear, I am not victim blaming. I am not for 1 minute saying that people shouldn't be able to go about their business and never be harmed. That is obvious that I feel that way. Unfortunately, at times it's not the world that we live in. So we have to equip ourselves with what we are told by criminals makes people victims, and it is availability, desirability, and vulnerability. So when you're hyper anxious and you're out, you need to think about the anchors that you have around you that make you feel safer. And that may be making sure that you take somebody that makes you feel really safe around them. It makes sure that they don't leave you alone. You make sure that you've got a get to and go home plan. All of those little foundations can create a more supportive environment where, yes, you are still going to be scared because it happened to you, but you are going to feel that you have a strategic objective and a process of how you're going to achieve that objective by planning. That might make life feel a bit more beige right now, because, you know, it might not feel super sexy when people are saying, let's go on a spontaneous night out. And you're like, wait, before we do that, let's just plan exactly how I'm getting there, who's going to be with me, how much money I need to take, who's going to be getting the taxi home with me, and so on and so forth. But that's an essential ingredient of creating a peaceful experience for you when you go out and do that. So that's number one. Number two, strongly recommend speaking to your GP about getting some therapy. Just because you need to talk that stuff out. I don't mean that you need to have some long drawn out trauma work. I'm saying that you kind of need to be able to just sit with somebody and go, mind blowing that happened. You know, out of all the people in the world, it was me that got attacked. I'm angry, I'm pissed off, I'm upset, I'm sad, I'm hurt, I'm violated, I'm all of these things, and I need to just say it. You know, that is a powerful thing to go through in therapy. It's a validating scenario, and I think that you would benefit from that as well. In the meantime, if you can't achieve that, because obviously there's a waiting list, so you might have to wait until that occurs, doesn't mean that you can't speak to people around you. Because when something happens to us, firstly, it's an abandoning scenario, because what we felt in our sensibilities has been impacted on and violated. So now we feel like we've been through something other people don't know. It feels abandoning, isolating. And also, we start to kind of build questions in the what ifs. Well, what if I'd done this? What if I'd done that? What if I hadn't worn that? All those crazy things that keep us up at night that are fully irrelevant to the actual scenario that unfolded. But sometimes just kind of exploring that with somebody. Even if you can't speak to your friends and family, find a support group where women and men sit down and are like, they don't even need to discuss what happened because you're all in the same space, but you can just connect over the fact that you're human beings who are struggling and suffering because of somebody else's actions. All of that can really make a difference. But like I said, I don't think you're socially anxious. I think you're traumatized, and it makes perfect sense that you would be. And that's not a failing on your part. It's a reaction to a hostile experience, right? It's a really, really hostile experience that you've been through. And I'm really sorry it happened. And like I said, when I talk about being available, vulnerable, and desirable, it's not about you failing in any way. It's that people who want to exploit and are predators they just look for any chinks in our armour, and most of us have got chinks in our armour. It's as simple as that. Any advice on ending a marriage where kids are involved? Bury them under the patio. That was a joke. That was a joke. Don't do that. That would be terrible, and it would end up on my crime channel, and I'd be conflicted because I'd be presenting it whilst also knowing that I incited it. Just saying, cognitive dissonance there. On a serious note, look, my marriage ended when my husband had an affair. That was a moment in time where everything I thought I knew dissolved, and every picture of possibility and future evaporated, just gone. And that in itself is an overwhelming moment, and it's scary. And what we do when we're scared is we decide to put obstacles and limiters in our place. So when people say, I want a divorce, but I'm worried about the children, and please don't feel I'm judging you, and you know yourself better than me, but I've worked in relationship work for many years in the past, and my experience is this: when we say, I want to stay because we've got kids, or I don't know what to do because I've got kids, we're looking for a reason to limit our behaviour, to limit our movement because we're scared. And I think sometimes it would be easier if we just said, I'm in a really unrealistically unhappy as well relationship, and I'm scared of leaving it. Because it almost feels like, what, you're unhappy? You don't find it realistic? It's not working? And you're staying? Because essentially that's what we're saying, isn't it? You know, you don't love them, you don't want to have sex with them, they annoy you, and you know, you just still don't know whether to leave, because being on your own and facing financial issues and dealing with all the issues that being a single parent creates, it's really scary. And it is. It's also really okay, because the idea is always far worse than the actual doing. But I think sometimes it's like, bring it back to the basis of, the kids will be okay. And the kids will fundamentally be okay because you'll make them okay. The fact that you're asking a question about protecting your kids says they're really lucky. They've got a mum who loves them. So they've already won that lottery. And there are plenty of kids who don't have parents who love them. Your kids are already ahead of the game. Secondly, you're thinking about the feelings. That's why you're asking what you're asking. So again, they're not going to be abandoned in any way, shape or form. The bigger question is, knowing that your kids are going to be fine, it's going to hurt a little bit to a lot, you know. We always want our parents to stay together because they're parents and it's what we know. And you have a period of adjustment and adaptation, and they'll know people who've been through it, and they'll see that lots of other people survive it. And the way that they will fundamentally really cope is how you two cope in your co-parenting and how you respond and react to each other. You have to make sure that your ex is still somebody that has value in their life. You have to make sure that they're somebody that you talk positively about, even if you don't really feel like you want to. And you make sure that those kids feel that they're allowed a great relationship with both of you. But maybe start having those more challenging conversations with yourself, which is, I want out, but I'm really scared of getting out. I'm really scared of what that means. And my mum is quite a harsh person when it comes down to advice, but she would always say the same things, which is, if you split up and it's not meant to be that that's the case, then you could always return to the relationship. And that's a very true belief system to hold. It's like, what you feel now is what you feel now, and as you evolve through those feelings and take the action that's required to change the situation, you'll figure it out. And if, for example, you realise that that wasn't what you wanted in 6 months' time, you'd figure it out. It's like not the end of anything world-wise when we shift paradigms in relationships. So just feel that and know that. And like I said, as long as the kids are loved, secure, fed, and are made to know that it's got nothing to do with them and everything to do with just people falling out of love, and that they're allowed to keep a really solid relationship with you and your ex, and you raise your ex up, and that's the really important thing to do, if you ask my children, and this is really honest, if you ask them about the negatives that I've said about my ex, they would tell you the truth is that I don't do that, I never have and never will, because I want them to feel that their basis of their relationship is based on their experience and not my suggestions. And that's really important. And sometimes it can really help to do future focused stuff. So when it came down to animosity and acrimony in a relationship, which everybody goes through when you're divorcing because it's all about money and the things that really get in the way, I future focused everything. So I would just sit in those moments where fundamentally I was like struggling and feeling abandoned and angry and rageful and wanting to say nasty things and the natural stuff that we all want to do when we feel hurt. I would just close my eyes and I would see myself stood next to my husband at one of our boys' weddings, just looking proud in the photographs together. And it has always been the very picture that I've carried throughout my life since my 2-year-old and 4-year-old were individuals who experienced a divorce because of the fact that me and their father separated. I still have that perfect image in my mind of me and my ex stood slightly more weathered now with more appropriate pictures because I know what he looks like and I look like, but stood there just really proud. My ex came to my father's funeral, sat with my kids, you know. They're really important future focusing moments that can make a massive difference for how you cope with your children, how they cope with the divorce and how you cope with your ex. That's what I'd say. Sorry to bring in the personal, but from a relationship therapy point of view perspective, I think it's got less weight than my personal experience, because genuinely the advice I would have given you would have been similar professionally, but it feels a lot more authentic when I bring in what it felt like to be a mother who went through that. How do you get out of depression when you are a single parent to a baby and you have no support? My ex-partner has had a new baby with a new partner. I feel so rejected for me and my baby. Will I be loved again? I feel like it was all false. It wasn't. I know it feels like that, but it wasn't. Love is transitory sometimes, and that doesn't help you in any way, shape or form. The idea that, well, that's great, it's transitory, and get into a relationship and then they can leave me. Yeah, they can. That's okay, because you're en route to where you need to be. And I know that is something that is almost trite to say. And there's a saying that I've always had, and somebody gave it me on my mug, that I had smashed not so long ago, but I'll just get another one, because the saying goes, everything will be all right in the end, and if it isn't all right, then it isn't the end. And I live my life that way. When it comes down to relationships, you are on your way to exactly where you need to be, my love. Everyone is on their way to where they need to be, and sometimes these horrible things happen to us. You know, we're passengers for a momentary experience as somebody else crashes the car. And we have to deal with the feelings and ramifications that that poses and creates for us. But you just have to trust that you're on your way. And this experience of being abandoned by this man and being gifted this beautiful child that is going to love you more than that man could even try to love you. Even when you meet the man of your dreams, who will walk into your life at some random point when you're not expecting it, and you will just connect effortlessly and travel with that person eternally. The point is, he will never, ever be able to fill you and love you in the way that baby is going to fill you and love you. And I think that's really difficult for partners, particularly when you're a mother and you have a partner, because you just know that if it came down to the gunman walking in and you had to choose one of the people to die, it would definitely be the partner, right? Because the love you feel for that baby and the way that baby loves you, it's just going to be forever, and it's going to be ultimate, and it's going to be intense. So you have in your arms right now the biggest love story that you are ever going to live. And if people haven't told you that now, because people talk about babies being hard work and they talk about all the exhaustion and, you know, it's all there, you know what I mean? It's one of those things when you're a mum, you do all of that stuff, but do we often talk about the intense love story that you're going to live, that you're beginning to live right now? Has anyone sat you down and helped you to really understand the fact that you've just become a superhero? It doesn't matter that you're depressed to that baby. It doesn't matter that you haven't got the answers to the love of your life. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. That baby looks at you and you are everything it has ever wanted, everything it's ever needed. And it would not matter if Superman or Superwoman walked into the room now, the child would choose you above everything and anyone else. That is an unbelievably powerful position to be in, and one that very few people seem to talk about, because we're always afraid of making people feel guilty because they don't feel perfect. But your child thinks you're perfect. They don't want you to be any more than you are in this moment right now. Only other people and you will feel that way about yourself. So first of all, understand that you're living the biggest love story you'll ever live, and you're going on the biggest journey you'll ever go, and you are perfect to that baby. And that's why that baby and you, the relationship there, is pure and beautiful. And your ex, well, you learn that he's not the one for you, but you were bestowed this beautiful blessing, which is his baby. You don't want him wasting another moment. He's gone off and got somebody else pregnant. Don't start imagining that that's because she's worth more than you. It's just that he's got no tolerance for long-term relationships, and he'll probably go and do that a few more times in his life. And isn't it good that you have now got the space cleared? Because you are a committed and loyal person who wants the fairy tale and wants the lifelong romance with somebody who's an equal. And fortunately, he's not screwing up another day of your life, so that you actually now can fundamentally meet that person when you're ready. The depression, right? You've had a baby. Your hormones are everywhere. And unlike in other depressions, when it comes down to postnatal depression, the truth is that it can be chemical and hormonal. So if you haven't been and taken the Edinburgh scale at the doctor's, go down and check it out, because you could be off the chart with it. I know that channelmum.com have got the friendly version of the Edinburgh scale, so you could go on there and take it and see how you fare on the postnatal depression score. But just have a look, because a lot of mums really feel like they are somehow failing because they feel sad. You're not. You're reacting. It can take a few years before you get on an even keel. It's also why women don't want to have sex for the first few years after having a baby. It's not because you feel frumpy or unsexy. It's that nature has said, yeah, you're not going to get involved with any of that sex stuff because you've got a baby to keep surviving. So it's like we're keyed in hormonally and environmentally and evolutionarily to our children and babies. So again, you need to go and get a check out and check up about that, because don't struggle. You don't need to struggle. You can get all of that checked out and balanced out. And then, well, it's about realizing that as a single mum, you're multifaceted, you're interesting, you're learning, you're growing, and also you'll never put a man first. And those lessons are powerful, because when you meet the person who's going to fit into your world, they're going to respect that. And you're not even going to realize how strong you've become and how resilient you've become, because you've just been bossing it without even knowing. So just try to take heart. And like I said, if there's one thing that you need to remember, is you are ultimately living this love story that you've not even thought about yet, because you've been down about what's been going on. But it's okay, because at this moment in time, the one who fully adores you, even when they cry and scream and get colic and do all of those things, is that baby. They love you more than you've ever been loved. So in those moments of desperation and sadness and fear and exhaustion, and even when you can't be arsed and you wish you hadn't done it, just remember that it still doesn't matter. Because with all of those feelings, and in spite of all of those feelings, that baby thinks you're perfectly perfect as you are. Did you say, Pete, that you wanted me to say one more thing because you got rid of the screen? Was this something I was meant to figure before the end of the...
People would be asking about the anxiety around
the war.
The
war.
Yeah, just to mention it again for you.
About children or about them?
Well, in general, yeah.
So what I said at the very beginning was that it's really important and imperative when you're faced with something that you can't control to relinquish the desire to do so. And the reason I've said that is 2 years ago, when COVID began, think about the people who came out and said to themselves, you know what, I'm just going to get on with my life. I'm not going to believe in all of this stuff. I'm going to just accept that I've only got this moment and life can end in any way, shape or form at any moment where I give us notice. It can. So I'm just going to live my best life in my present moment with the restrictions that are happening, but I'm going to do it without fear. They fared better psychologically, anxiety-wise, depression-wise, than people who decided to verbatim take in and believe everything they were being told, even if that was true. The reason is because people who were choosing their present had power over it. People who were choosing to believe that somebody else was in control of their present felt helpless. That's what happens. If you give your power away, you feel helpless. So the only way to stop feeling helpless is to either do what I would do in these circumstances, which is what I say is, I can control none of those things. Therefore, I will not give my power to it. I will not give my emotion to it. I will not give my time to it. I can feel empathy and compassion for people in the Ukraine and Russia because there are no winners in war. It's as simple as that. And it's far better for me to do things like donate money or raise money or look at how I could potentially help a refugee, which is what I've been looking at today. They're things that are empowering and helpful and actually have purpose and impact. That reduces anxiety because now I'm not completely helpless in the world around me. I have an opportunity to do something constructive. Secondly, anxiety is about trying to control things that are beyond your control a great deal of the time because you start catastrophizing about possibilities and probabilities and everything in between. And you have to ask yourself a question, okay, what did it solve? Really, ask yourself that question. So if any of you can come on and say, well, my massive anxiety about Putin resulted in Putin standing down and just having a cup of tea with us all and chilling out, all power to you. You can do that. I am 100% behind that action, but I pretty much believe that every single person who is super anxious about the war is having absolutely no impact on it whatsoever. The last 2 years of me campaigning against vaccines for kids, against lockdowns because of the way it impacts on crime and abuse and all the things in between, it had purpose. I knew that people like Boris Johnson got to see the stuff I was saying and got to read the things I was writing. Yes, it caused me some pain. Yes, it caused me some loss. It was worth every moment because I know that I impacted on that. Therefore, the stress and anxiety I felt had purpose because I had control and leverage over my actions that caused consequential change along with lots of other people. Combined, it had an impact. I can't do that in the Ukraine and Russia. So where are my energies best spent? Where are your energies best spent? Do not give your power and fear away to something you have no control over, which steals the joy and the present and the moment and everything that has meaning in the here and now. If you have children, then concentrate your focus on really embracing the moments and the time and the joy that you have with them. If you have lovers, make sure that you spend time intimately with them, enjoy their laughter, enjoy eating food with them, do things that make you grateful for what you have in this moment where other people choose other paths because they don't have those opportunities. People in the Ukraine aren't getting those opportunities. And there's something about forming that gratitude and that knowledge that we are blessed. We are still in a democracy in the UK. There is something still ultimately beautiful about this country and the way that we operate and expect democracy to play out. I'm not saying that you use that and say, well, aren't we miles luckier than the Ukraine? And ha ha ha, it's quite the contrary. It's like, you know, the compassion we feel towards that country is huge. But let's not lose sight of the blessings of what we experience, and let's not give that away to anxiety and stress. Instead, let's be sturdy and let's think about how we can help our children to feel reassured and safe. Even though we can't promise them the world and we can't promise them that everything will always be perfect, in this moment we can make them feel that they are reassured. We are their safe spaces, and even if we don't feel it, then we need to stand strong and say that we do feel that it's safe and they will be okay. That's how we reduce their anxiety, and as we start to believe in that mindset, we start to reduce ours. Everything finds its way. This time will pass, just as good times and bad times have passed before. And ask yourself the questions about what we're learning and how we're growing and what motivates you to change the way that you think and feel based on the information that you have. These are all things that are very powerful. The obvious things are, try not to watch the news. I genuinely think that it's one of the cancers of our existence. And I really mean that. Because a cancer, it's one of those things that you feel the growth, and if you allow it to metastasize, then it can spread and it can consume and it can destroy. But if you just concentrate on the power that you have to remove the tumour, so to speak, in this case, too much news, too much information, too much online experience, then you cut it dead and you allow yourself to home into the health, which is, in this case, being mentally more able and stable because you're not exposing yourself to negativity constantly. At the very, very beginning of this, and before I leave and go tonight, one of the big things that I said is that our brain is fine-tuned to connect with negativity over everything else because it's a survival strategy. It's as simple as that. You think about the olden times when we were cavemen, Neanderthal, all of those things. It was paramount that you notice things that were negative because they were usually threats. They could cause you to be damaged or your life to be ended. So of course you finely tuned your brain to notice that. This day and age, our brain still does that, but it notices things that firstly have no imminent threat towards us, secondly higher our anxiety levels, and most importantly, even when we've noticed and had those anxiety levels higher, ultimately changes nothing apart from our mental health negatively. Saying don't care about what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine is obviously not what I'm suggesting. I'm saying care strategically. If you want to do something useful, think about how you can raise money, you can help kids feel in control by doing cake sales at school so that they can get involved. Get people to feel purpose and empowerment, not helplessness. And the big thing is, like, after years of coping with something that you probably never thought you'd cope with, which was the pandemic and all the horrible traumatizing information that you were given by the press, most of which never actually happened, it's an important lesson to learn. We know that there is definitely a war happening in Russia and the Ukraine, but also we know that the press tend to tell us something that is skewed. It serves their purpose, sells a lot of papers, and let's never forget that there's a political dialogue that's going on that we won't be aware of. And how much do you want to get involved in that bigger picture? And how much should we maybe be saying to ourselves, it's time for our children to be released from this fear? How do we encourage them to feel that living in the here and now is what is going to be healthiest and happiest for their anxiety levels, their stress levels, and also for the feedback to us? Because I don't think any parent's happy if their children aren't. That's what I'd say. Listen, guys, it's been lovely chatting. I will see you again next week, as ever. You're never getting rid of me, no matter what, even if you try. Take care. Bye.